want change. There's people who want change. And then there are people who pray to God for change. And I heard that this morning, and I went, you know what? Let us be a people who prays to God for change. That's what the 24 hours of prayer is about. That's what we're coming to be. We're going to go down to the chapel. We're going to start at 3 o'clock, and it is because of this. Because we want to see God change our city. We want to be a people who stand and say, you know what, God? It doesn't matter how good of a person I am. Without you, it makes no difference. Because we need you to change us, because you're in the business of changing souls. You change lives because you change souls. So I'm going to encourage you in that. If you have your Bible, you can flip over to Ecclesiastes chapter 7. That's where we're going to be in just a second. We're going to be over there. It's going to be on the overheads. But before we get there, I always like to start out talks with questions. And I'm going through this series, and what I'm about to read to you, I was like, wow. Because he asked some questions in Ecclesiastes chapter 7. And as we go through those questions, it made me think of these questions. If you could take and pick out, if you got a basket, and God said, okay, here's what you get to load up in your basket today. Today, you get to load up in your basket, you get to load up the 5 best days you've ever had. Could you do that? Could you go back and could you go, man, on this day, this was good, and I'm just keeping that. That was an awesome day. And get this one and put it there, and get this one and put it there. He's like, man, these were some good days. Probably you could do that, right? You could probably go back and say, man, these were some good days. I want these in my basket. Days that you would never, ever trade. I've got a few, you know. And I look at that, and maybe it was the day you got married, man. The day that I got married, I can remember that. I can remember exactly how it went down. Maybe it was the day that, if you've had kids and you go, oh, I can tell you that when Brian was born and Brittany was born, how cool that was. I can tell you that when Brittany was born, we stayed in the hospital 2 days, and clear is in my mind. I mean, I can go back there, and I can feel the sun rays on my face. I can feel the handles of the wheelchair that as I'm pushing my wife out, and she's got Brittany in her arms, and Brian had these little pants that had suspenders hooked to them. And you may not picture Brian with suspenders. He's my son. He's sitting in the back there. He had little suspenders and this little white shirt and these little, cool shoes. And he just was running out of the hospital with this big smile on his face. I can still feel those days. I still have those. Maybe yours are different. I can still feel the weather on the day that I gave my life to Christ, because for me that was a big deal. It wasn't just a thing, man. It was an impact that changed my life. Because for me, I didn't come in slowly. Some people kind of come in and they kind of wade into the water. They get their tippy toes a little bit wet, and then they little ankles, and they figure out God a little bit more, and then they're to their knees. Man, for me, it was like, bam! I was going this way, and then I was going this way. And it was automatic, and it was a big deal in my life. And if I could go back and pick out 5 days and say, these are the days, I could take you to all 5 places. I could take you to all of them and say, this was great. What if God said, I want you to pick out the 5 best days, and I want you to pick out the 5 worst days. The 5 worst days of your life. What were they? And you know what? I was able to, as I did this in my head, able to come up with the 5 worst days faster than I came up with the 5 best days. Because at those days, man, you just sit there and you just go, oh God, where are you at? Why would you even let this happen? Man, I don't get this at all. And I can take you back to those spots. And I can tell you, man, that those days changed my life. But I can also take you back to those days. And I can say, if you came to me and said, hey, Paul, here's the deal. You got your 5 good days. You got your 5 bad days. You got your baskets. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you to trade in your good days for money. Would you do it? Not a chance. Those days were worth far more than money. The smile that's on your face, the wow, this is life, you couldn't pay me enough for those days. And if you offered me the same deal and you said, Paul, okay, here are these 5 bad days. These are the worst days of your life. For some of you, maybe it's the day that your parents came in and said, we're done. For some of you, maybe it was you that walked through the door and said, I'm done. For some of you, maybe it was the day that a friend died or a family member died. Whatever. I'm going to give you money for those days. You can cash them in and never have them be a part of your life. Would you do it? Some people are saying, yeah, in a heartbeat. You could have all 5 of them for $1. They're yours, man. But you know what? The older I get, the more I wouldn't trade those either. And you know why? Because they develop your character. Those days, as much as it's like the good days are like, wow, this is what it means to be alive. The other days are the days that you figure out why you're alive. And you figure out how to do life. And so Solomon, in his wisdom, he's gathered around these guys. He's telling them how to live life. And he starts off, and this is what he says. And we're going to read this, and we're going to read from verses 1 to 14. But I want to take you down to, I think it's verse 28. I don't have my notes in front of me that far. But he makes this statement, and I believe it's in verse 28. And he compares the wisdom of men to the wisdom of women. And I just want to touch on this for just a second, because if you're going through this study with me, you're going to read it and you're going to go, what was that? Because he compares the wisdom. He says, there's only a righteous man and 1 in 1,000 men, and I have never come across a righteous woman. And that could cause you some struggles, right? Especially if you're a woman, right? Like, oh, the Bible, what does that mean? Here's what that means, because you're going to read it this week. If you're following this study with me, you're going to read it this week. Here's what it means. That was a saying in his time. And his people understood that saying meant there is nobody righteous. There's not a man or a woman alive who is righteous. That's what the saying meant. And if you go into the writings of Paul, he also says there's nobody righteous. There's not a man on the planet who is righteous. Everybody blows it. And so as you're reading this, as you're following along and we're going through this Bible study, and you come to that portion, do not let that trouble you. It was not meant to be there to make you stumble. It was just a way of saying, everybody blows it, nobody's righteous. Cool? All right, now let's get to this passage of Scripture. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this. I'm going to break this down in our talk. Sometimes I break it down as I go through. I'm not going to do that this time. It says, a good reputation is more valuable than the most expensive perfume. In the same way, the day you die is better than the day you were born. It is better to spend your time at funerals than at festivals. Boy, that'll mess you up. For you are going to die. And you should think about it while there's still time. Sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on us. A wise person thinks much about death, while a fool only thinks about having a good time. Just a little pause. Which one do you think more of? Which one do you think about more often? It is better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool. Indeed, a fool's laughter is quickly gone, like thorns crackling in a fire. This is all so meaningless. Extortion turns wise people into fools, and bribes corrupt the heart. Finishing is better than starting. That's a true statement. And patience is way better than pride. Don't be quick-tempered, for anger is the friend of fools. Don't long for the good old days, for you don't know whether they were any better than these days. Being wise is as good as being rich. In fact, it is better. Wisdom or money can get you almost anything. But it's important to know that only wisdom can save your life. Notice the way God does things. Then fall into line. Don't fight the ways of God. For who can straighten out what He has made crooked? Enjoy prosperity while you can. But when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. That way you realize that nothing is certain in this life. Have you figured that out? Have you lived long enough to know that absolutely nothing is certain in this life? Right? I mean, you come around things and it's like you, just as you're getting ready to put your mind on something, this is what we're going to do, everything changes. You're like, whoa. And so Solomon has these guys, and I think this is really interesting because he has these guys around him. And he's speaking to them, and he's saying, and the very first thing he says, and I think it's so interesting that he says this in chapter 7. He says, develop your character before you develop your career, is essentially what he's saying. He says, a good reputation is more valuable than the most expensive perfume. The most expensive perfume. That don't go out and develop your career and make a whole bunch of money so you can buy the most expensive perfume. Develop your character. Because you see, your character is the key to everything else. Have you realized that? Your character is the key to everything else. It's the key to how you respond to life when life goes bad. It's the key to the things that you believe. Here's what he's saying. He's saying there's a lot of people out there in this life who say one thing and do another. Have you guys noticed that? Have you guys noticed that? That you'll even find some of your best friends, and they'll say one thing, and as long as they don't have to put their reputation on the line, as long as things don't change in their life, they're okay, and they make their proclamation, and I believe this, I believe this, I believe this, and as soon as things get tough, they go do something else. And you're like, hey, wait a second, what's up with that? And there's a lot of people in this world who are more concerned with themselves than they are other people. Have you seen that one too? And there's a lot of people in this world who treat other people really, really, really bad. And I love this because the very first thing he's saying to these guys, he's saying, develop your character. Don't be one of them. Develop your character. I've shared this story many times. And it's not even in my notes at this point. But I can tell you this story, and this is probably one of the most impactful moments of my life. It had nothing to do with me. It wouldn't be in my top 5 in my basket. If I had to choose my 5 good and my 5 bad, this is not in the basket. But I'm walking in this house, and as I'm walking in this house, there's this friend that I hadn't seen in 16 years. He's walking out of the house. And he's got his head down, and you can see his life is not going well. And we almost bump into each other. I see him coming, I'm looking up, I'm watching, and he bumps into him, and he goes, oh, Paul. And he almost stumbles, his knees buckle when he sees me. Because what happened was there's this amazing thing that happens when you run into a pastor and you're feeling guilty. And he's going, oh, geez, what are you doing here? God. And I mean that, in the sense of, oh, God, you busted me again. And he just says, you're a pastor, right? I said, yeah. This is a guy I grew up going to church with, okay? You need to understand that part too. He said, yeah. And he just looks up at me and he looks down and he goes, dude, I went through a divorce this year. I said, I'm so sorry. And he said, Paul, if I would have known what I know on this side, I would never have done it on that side. He said, I'm so sorry. He had not developed his character. His character was so lousy. For years, his character was so lousy. And this made him go, I got to change my life. He was saying, and he told me this, because he knew that at this time I was a youth pastor. And he told me, he said, so when you work with your kids, will you tell them it's not worth it? And I looked up at him and I said, I'll do it. But you see, Solomon is saying that on this side. He's saying, hey, listen, guys, Man, my dad, when I was a little kid, right before my dad died, he said, Solomon, be a guy who follows God with your whole heart, your whole life. That's my instruction to you. Would you just do that? And then if you read the story of David and you find David giving these instructions to Solomon, and then he dies. And then you find Solomon and you watch Solomon's life, and Solomon goes and does everything but that. And then he comes to the end of his life. And he says, oh, I wish I would have did it differently. You see, you guys get an opportunity to do it differently. That no matter where you're at tonight, no matter if you're coming up and you're in your 20s or in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, whatever the age group is tonight, you have the opportunity to turn back and go, you know what? I'm going to do it differently. I didn't develop my character, but I'm going to develop my character in the future. I'm not going to do it this way anymore. You see, what the world needs more than anything else is people who are deeply, deeply, deeply concerned about their character because they know they're going to stand before God someday. I had a situation this week, and my wife and I, we went to the Love and Respect conference, which was absolutely amazing. If you got to be a part of that, it was absolutely fantastic. And after the Love and Respect conference, we went home and we got my motorcycle and we went for a motorcycle ride, and we were on the bike, and we talked when we were on the bike and work out a lot of things. And the bike is really cool because you can just, man, you're on the bike and wind's blowing in your face and it's just cool and you feel cool. It's a good time to be cool. And we're sitting there talking, and I bring up something that has nothing to do with her, but has something to do with a situation that I've got going in my life that it just is a tough situation. And every time we're around the corner, and I think, it's going to get better. Eventually, they're going to forgive me. Eventually, they're going to accept my apologies. And then it doesn't happen. Now, and so I told my wife, I said, you know what, sweetheart? I'm so done with this situation. I am just so done with this. I'm so done with putting myself out there and getting my hand slapped. I'm not going to do that anymore. And my wife is really wise. She says, no, you're not. You're not done. I said, no, I am. She says, no, you're not. You don't have a choice. I said, I do too. Just because I'm a pastor doesn't mean I can always put myself out there and get hurt. And she said, no, it has nothing to do with you being a pastor. She says, one of these days you're going to stand before God, and He's going to inspect your character. And you're going to make the right choice today because you're going to stand before God and you're accountable to God. I hate it when she's so smart. I hate it that she's smarter than I am. I thought I married her because she was a cheerleader and had nice legs, but no, she's smarter than I am. Drives me crazy. She's pretty and smart. But you see, we need people who are concerned about their character. We need to not hold people high that have bad character. I'm an NFL guy, and man, I watch the stuff in the NFL, and I just go, you know what, these guys that are more concerned about how many touchdowns they catch than the rest of their team, and that they do things and say things that should be embarrassing to their parents, and we treat it like it's normal. We take images of girls, and that they sell themselves in just such trashy ways, and we go, hey, it's all okay, man. She's beautiful. And she's rich. She should do that. And we should say, no, it's not okay. And it's not a model that we'll follow. Because when you're concerned with your character, you be concerned with how you're going to stand before God. And you become concerned with the influence that you're going to have on others. I was in my devotions this morning reading 1 Peter 1, 13 through 16, and it just says this. It says, so think clearly and exercise self-control. Look forward to the special blessings that will come to you at the return of Jesus Christ. Obey God because you are His children. Don't slip back into your old ways of doing evil. You didn't know any better then. But now you must be holy in everything you do, just as God, who chose you to be His children, is holy. Catch this. For He Himself has said, you must be holy because I am holy. God is deeply concerned with our character, guys. I love this. He goes on to say this. He says, and then the next thing you do is this. Realize that you learn more from your pain than you do from your peace. You know what? Those days that I told you were my 5 best days? I can take those days, and as much as I can look back and say, man, those were great days. If you said, what'd you learn from that? Like, not a thing, man. Not a thing. But those were good days. But if you came to me and said, hey, so you know those 5 bad days that you were talking about? What did you learn from those? You and I would talk for hours. You and I would talk for hours. Ecclesiastes 7, 1 through 4. In the same way, the day you die is better than the day you were born. It is better to spend your time at funerals than at festivals. For you are going to die, and you should think about it while there's still time. I think that's an interesting little line. You should think about it while there's still time. Because he's saying this, what happens when the time runs out and you didn't think about it? Think about that. That's one of those thoughts like, oh, geez. That's a scary thought. You should think about it. He says, sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on a wise person. And a wise person thinks much about death, while a fool only thinks about having a good time. He's not saying God causes your pain so that you will think about Him. He's not saying that. He's not coming to the conclusion that pain is meaningless, which is a lot of the conclusion that you and I come to. We think, why would a loving God cause us to go through so much pain? Why would a loving God allow us to go through the pain we're going through? I think it's interesting. Being in the ministry, you get to watch a lot of things. And pain has the ability to bring you to conclusions that you would never come to on your own. I watch different people in different situations. And there is something about spending years and years and years adding up money on your credit card without fully paying it off, that at the end of that process, there's pain. And you're financially strapped and you can't do anything and you don't know what to do. And you don't know where to go. And now all of a sudden, you've allowed yourself over years to be trapped into a situation. And you're wondering, God, how am I going to get out of this? I think it's interesting that he talks about death. As a pastor, I get to do way too many funerals. But you've probably been to a funeral before too. And there's something about a funeral that when you stand either beside the casket or you stand just off and the casket's in front of you, that there is no way that you can go to a funeral without thinking about death. And there's no way that you can go to a funeral without realizing how short life is. And that life is really not guaranteed to anybody. You see, I believe that it's not wrong to pray that God would spare us pain. But I do believe that it's wrong to come to the conclusion that God is any less loving because we have it. And I do believe that when we come to the conclusion that our pain is a proof of an unloving God, and that if God really loved us, He'd deal with it, and that because He doesn't deal with it, He doesn't love us, is the wrong conclusion. I was listening to a story this week of a guy that he was asked his 2 best days. Would you mind telling me your 2 best days? And he said, yeah, I can come to, without even thinking about it, he said, yep, I know my 2 best days. He said, my first day was the day I met God. The day that I gave my life to Christ was a life-changing moment for me. Absolutely life-changing. My second best day was the day that I found out I had cancer and only had 6 months to live. He said, those are my 2 best days. And the reason the second's my best day is because it put everything into perspective for me. It put life into perspective for me. And it made me seek my God more than I've ever sought my God before. My father-in-law was the coolest guy in the whole world. He was this Italian business guy, and he was absolutely amazing. He was smart. He was funny. He was just cool just to hang around with. And one morning, 5 years ago and 2 weeks, 2 weeks and 5 years ago, at 5:30 in the morning, I got a phone call. Absolutely one of the worst phone calls I've ever received. And on the other end was my mother-in-law. And my father-in-law had passed away in the middle of the night. Still emotional. But it wasn't the worst day. Because 3 months before that, we had just built this building. And my father-in-law was far, 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 far from God, but he told some very funny jokes. None that you could ever repeat in church, but they were funny. And we were walking around and we were checking out this building, and he'd say, well, Paul, why does your church do this? He said, most of the churches I go to, they have pews. Oh, yeah, we don't do pews. We don't do pews. We want people to be comfortable. We do these chairs, and it just, I don't know, we like it this way. He said, that's kind of cool. He says, well, where's your choir loft? I said, well, we don't do a choir loft. As a matter of fact, we have this really cool band, and these guys rock. And it is so much fun to come to a church that just has a really cool rockin' band with an ex-Harley member guy with tattoos on his arm. He's like, that's cool. And we're walking around the campus. He says, like, where do you baptize people? He hadn't been in church for a really long time. And he was looking for the baptism, that thing where you have water in it. When I was a kid, we used to throw fish in there before service. It freaked out the pastor. So I said, we don't have one of those. As a matter of fact, we like to go out and we like to do them at a pool or out at the lake. And you know what? It just becomes this place, and that people get a public image of people's lives being changed. And as a matter of fact, when we've gone and done that, we've actually watched people who came over and said, man, I don't go to church, but I've been wanting to be baptized my whole life. And could I use this as an act of me giving my life to God? And we've done it. It's really cool. He's like, that's cool. And we go walking out to the youth building, and I'm showing him the high school building, and I'm really proud of it. I'm like, here's what we do. We have our own rockin' cool band. Nobody has tattoos yet. Their mom and dad won't let them. But we're hoping. No, I'm kidding. Okay, sorry. And we got to tell him all these things, and pretty soon he knows he's going to die. He's got 3 months to live. He just burst out crying. And he said, I know why I'm on the planet. I said, why? He said, in this time, I discovered God. In this time, I found out that God loves me, and He put me on the planet to reach people, not make money. He figured it out. If you asked him what was his best days of his life, he would tell you it was the last part of his life, because he figured out his purpose. He figured out why he was on the planet. He figured out God. You see, young people have the ability to blame God for their pain. But wise people have the ability to find God in the midst of it. That is wisdom. You know, happiness does not have the ability to make us whole, but pain has the ability to make us wise. I don't pray for pain, but I do pray that God would use me and change me in the midst of it. And you see, that is why wisdom is really knowing that you don't know everything. You want to know when you're really, really wise? When somebody can ask you a question and you go, dude, I don't have any idea. The wisdom is knowing you don't know everything. Ecclesiastes 5-12, I love this portion because he just goes random here. And that's maybe my ADD working. But he says it's better to be criticized by a wise person than by a fool. You know, wouldn't you rather have one of your friends look you in the eyes and say, what are you doing? You are going to ruin your life. Versus the fool saying, hey, let's go ruin your life. This would be a lot of fun. We'll watch you go up in smoke. I'll sit back, me and my friends, we'll be spectator sport. He says, indeed, a fool's laughter is quickly gone, like thorns crackling in a fire. Have you ever thrown a big bush in the fire and here everything turns blue and it makes all these cool noise? And it lasts about that long. Extortion turns wise people into fools and bribes corrupts the heart. Finishing is better than starting. Patience is better than pride. He says, don't be quick-tempered, for anger is the friend of a fool. Don't long for the good old days, and don't you know, for you don't know whether they were any better than today. And being wise is as good as being rich. In fact, it's better. Wisdom or money can get you out of almost anything. But it is important to know that only wisdom can save your life. The reason we need other people, and wisdom is going through life with other people. We started these small groups so that you wouldn't have to go through life by yourself. Because there's wisdom in having friends and relationships and working things out. And in a matter of fact, we've got 5 more weeks of this. This will take us right through March. And then in April 1st, we're going to start a new series. It's going to be called Lost. I'll let you know more about that later. But you see, he's saying real wisdom is not going through life by yourself, because we all have blind spots, right? We all have blind spots. Ladies, you have blind spots, and guys, you have blind spots. And one of your blind spots, ladies, has to do in the relationship with guys. Ladies have a blind spot when it comes to relationships. And sometimes they will put themselves out there because of the need for the relationship. And see, don't you love it when you have a friend that'll come alongside you and say, all right, now listen up. He's cute. He's really good looking. He's even smooth. But man, he's a jerk. You stay away from him. Don't you love that? Do you appreciate those friends? We need those friends. And you know what, guys? We have these blind spots. The blind spots, we have a lot of blind spots. And probably just between us, because we're friends, and we wouldn't tell anybody else outside of this room, but guys probably have more blind spots than girls. Sorry, guys. But we have this blind spot that says, man, we really get caught up in what people think of us, and that we find our identity in stuff. And stuff doesn't have any identity. And yet that's the very thing that we get caught up in. You see, we chase things that in the end, in the long term, they have no worth, they have no value. And wisdom comes back to knowing you don't know everything and you need people. And so then I like this. Choose to believe in the goodness of God even when you don't understand the ways of God. When it all comes down and your life is having a good day, you're going to say, you know what, I believe in the goodness of God, even when I don't understand the goodness of God. And when your life is falling apart, that you'd stand and you'd say, you know what, I do not know why these things are happening, but I believe in the goodness of God. Notice the way God does things and then fall into line. If I was you, I'd underline that in my Bible, because I got it underlined in my Bible. Don't fight the ways of God, for you cannot straighten out what God has made crooked. Enjoy prosperity while you can, but when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. That way you will realize that nothing is certain in this life. I love Job. Job is an entire book of complaining. Complaining. God, you're so unfair. Why would you let this happen to me? God, you're so unjust. I am a man that loves you and serves you, and I put myself out there and I share my faith with everybody, and look what happened to me. God, you are so unloving. I am absolutely dying in my pain right now. I'm crying out to you, and you won't even talk to me. 37 chapters of that. But then, in chapter 38, the Lord answered Job from within a whirlwind. You ever feel like your life was in a whirlwind? Chapter 38 means the Lord answered God in spite of all of the craziness in Job's life. And he said this, "Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorant words? Brace yourself, because I have some questions for you. And I want you to answer them. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you know so much. Do you know how its dimensions were determined? And did you do the surveying yourself? What supports its foundations? And who laid its cornerstones? As this morning's stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy, who defined the boundaries of the sea and burst from its womb? And as I clothed it with clouds and thick darkness, for I locked it behind barred gates, limited its shores, I said, thus far and no farther will you come. Here your proud waves must stop. Have you ever commanded the morning to appear and caused the dawn to rise from the east? Have you ever told the daylight to spread to the ends of the earth, to bring an end to the night's wickedness?" And he goes on for another 21 verses in another chapter and asks Job, "Are you God? Because if you're God, just let me know and I'll back off. I'll get out of your life if you're God and if you can take care of your circumstances." And then Job replies, "No, I get it. You're God. And I need you." You see, here's what I'm going to ask you to do tonight. I'm going to ask that you would choose to believe in the goodness of God despite every circumstance in your life. I'm going to ask that tonight during this service that you would examine your life. We're going to ask the worship team to come on back up, and we're going to close with one last song. And as they play this last song, I want you to think about some things. Are you making choices that are wise? Or are you living in the moment? Are you blaming God for the things you don't understand? Maybe you've got the unfortunate pleasure of standing in front or beside a casket and contemplating the meaningless of some lives as they disappear and you wonder why. But can I ask you this? Have you stopped to contemplate your life and the importance that God has placed upon it? Have you stopped to contemplate and ask the question, where's God in all this? And I'm just going to ask that as we close with this last song, and then Sarah's going to come up and she's going to close us with a prayer. I'm going to ask that you would take this moment and that you would not pass by the opportunity that God knocks on your door and says, I want to know you. I want to walk with you. I created you for a purpose, and I have a plan for your life. And if you'll give me the bad days, they'll never be good days, but you'll be able to use them for good. Amen? Let's worship.